Good morning. I am Kevin Price. Delighted to be with you to talk to you about you and your business. Always like to have my good friend on, Lee Kaplan, with Smyser, Kaplan, and Veselka Law Firm. That's skv.com. And I think you always bring in stuff every single time you come in that, you know, I do a pretty good job of watching what's happening in the news, but you bring in stuff that I don't see or don't think about. I guess, is, you know, some of it's not the most pressing, like what's happening in the Ukraine and that type of thing. But it's very interesting and really tactically impacts our lives in really profound ways. And one of them, you know, is my Samsung that I'm sitting here holding, and they're now in another legal dispute. And it seems like it doesn't take long that, you know, that these two, in particular iPhone and Samsung, the two biggest players, keep going after each other.
That's right, and Apple is trying essentially to get Samsung barred from the United States and or get a huge toll for Samsung's phones. You know, worldwide, Samsung has a much larger share of the smartphone business than does Apple, something like 30 to 15%, whereas in the U.S., Apple is nearly 50%, and Samsung, again, is about 30%. So this is a very important market for Apple. And what's fascinating to me is that trial is taking place 15 miles from Apple's headquarters in California.
Yeah.
It's in the San Jose courthouse, I believe, where I've been. And it's been very difficult to find jurors who don't know a lot about Apple and have some fairly strong views. What's interesting to me about this case is two things. Number one is the lesson that we all learn, which is patent litigation is so expensive, only the big guys can afford it. So when the elephants clash like this, all the smaller innovators realize they can't stand the heat of a patent lawsuit. And I think it does discourage innovation to some extent when you've got people like this who have immense resources filing patent lawsuits. Although, you know, I'm not here to talk about the merits of the case because I don't know.
Right.
The second
they sort of go at it often, though. I think this is like the third or fourth time, you know, all over the world. They don't, you know, they do it in different places with different objectives.
They do this everywhere. They're going after each other. Samsung has counterclaims on its patents. What is probably interesting and people don't realize is you would think Apple would have a natural advantage on its home turf. That would be my first thought. But I have a suspicion that the lawyers on both sides have done a lot of what is called mock jury work or focus work. And there are probably a lot of people in that area who, for one reason or another, don't like Steve Jobs, don't like Apple, think it's arrogant and that sort of thing. And quite frankly, California has a large Asian American population.
That's what came to my mind.
And although Samsung is Korean and there are, you know, different factions of the Asian American community, those kind of things may cut both ways. And then you have individuals.
And think about the fact that California has the most discriminatory policies against Asians when it comes to education, for example, public education. You know, a lot of Asians might think, you know what, this might be an opportunity for us to snap back.
Well, perhaps in effect it does, because when you have blind admissions with such a large Asian population, any preferences for other groups are going to overcome that. But I don't know what will happen in that trial.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. It would be interesting to see what kind of questions are going to be probed in the jury selection.
Well, they'll probably ask if people, and they did ask, what kind of phones they had. And apparently almost everybody had an iPhone. So that the Samsung lawyer was asking, is there anybody here who has an Android phone, which is, you know, the system Samsung runs on. And I was a little surprised to find that almost everybody had an iPhone, even in California, because at least I've been told that the younger set is migrating more towards Android systems.
Yeah.
That right now Apple has more apps and that kind of thing, but the younger people go elsewhere. And the other surprise to me is that they haven't been able to work this out. I really am surprised they haven't found a way to cross-license each other. But it does look to me as though Apple is trying very hard to put such a big toll on Samsung that it can hold on to its eroding position in the marketplace.
Do you think part of that is done in order to shoot take a shot over the bow of other innovators to say, hey, you better watch it if you are an innovator? It isn't just directed towards Samsung, but towards other potential competitors as well?
Well, I haven't talked to anybody at either company, but it's certainly a natural byproduct. People who are not multi-billion-dollar enterprises very well know how costly it is. I saw something in the newspaper that I thought was clearly wrong, or maybe online, which is that Apple's legal costs were expected to be about $6 million. There is no way in the world that their costs for this litigation are only $6 million.
Yeah.
It'll be far in excess of that.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, just the cost of research, the cost of there's so many different aspects of choosing the team that chooses the jury. I mean, it's incredible what that entails. Interesting. Any thoughts on how that's going to end up? Probably very difficult to tell because when I look all over the world, it doesn't seem to be any method to the madness. It's based on the court.
Well, the war is going to go on forever. If I were to guess about the outcome of just this case, I'd bet on Apple because they're in their home territory. They're in a place where everybody knows them, and there's some natural bias or sympathy that way. But that doesn't mean it will survive whatever rulings the judge ultimately makes about a judgment and whatever happens on appeal.
What level of court is this,
This is in the federal district court. It's a Judge Lucy Coe who's fairly experienced in trying patent cases, as many of the judges are in the San Francisco, San Jose area.
Kind of have to be. And but there's several more levels after her of
right.
appeal.
Well, the next level is the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, which hears all patent appeals, and then perhaps the United States Supreme Court. In the last few years, the U.S. Supreme Court has taken more patent appeals than it used to. It used to leave everything to the Federal Circuit. In the last several years, it's become much more active, particularly in the area of software patents, which is a very troubled area. I tell you, there is one other thing I'd like to mention on the show, which is I contrast California and Texas lots of times. I just did that on my blog, lastreasonableman.com. California has all of this pizzazz and sizzle because it's got so much of this IT infrastructure there, whereas Texas is so much more energy-based and to a lesser extent, in Houston at least, healthcare-based because of the medical center. We need to have more of that kind of industry here. How we attract them, I'm not sure, but one thing we've got to do is have a better educated workforce. And I thought it was interesting. I just finished putting in a blog entry about the relative lack of discussion of education by the candidates for governor and lieutenant governor. And I see today that Greg Abbott came out yesterday with a plan for more intense pre-K education. Although it's about $118 million, and considering that we've still got $2 billion worth of the $5.4 billion in cuts from the last biennium yet to restore, $118 million doesn't seem like much.
Right.
It's good that he recognizes that early education is important. We need to get a better educated workforce in Texas if we want to snag those kinds of industries.
Lee Kaplan, he's a regular here on The Price of Business, and you can hear why, obviously. We love having him on as insight. Really awesome. I've already mentioned skv.com, but also check out lastreasonableman.com, lastreasonableman.com. Thanks for being with us.
Great. Enjoyed it very much.
As always, you do a great job. When we come back, much more for you. Do want to remind you best content here. Shows up over there at usdailyreview.com, and you're listening to The Price of Business.